Well, students, we're ready to start the lecture tonight, and it's on models, which may sound complicated, but it's really not. And so, let me start by saying that model is like a theory is like a paradigm. And what it means is that you have this cluster of concepts, assumptions, hypotheses, and they all tend to fit the four goals of science, which I told you about last week, which are description, explanation, prediction, and control. Once we get through Freud's theory, the whole notion of a model will become clearer. But we start off with psychoanalysis before Freud, and that is Joseph Breuer, who tended to talk about different kinds of therapy. And he had a case called Anna O. Her real name was Bertha Pappenheim. With that tongue twister, you can imagine why they called her Anna O. And Anna O developed some interesting symptoms. She was at her father's deathbed, and as her father was dying, he asked Anna what time it was. Wie spät ist es, Anna? How late is it? What time is it? He said. And she couldn't answer because her eyes were filled with tears and her throat was caught up in kind of an anxiety. So she couldn't answer, and her father died without getting his final wish. And guilt from that caused Anna O to develop symptoms which are kind of related to her misdeed. She developed some visual problems, she developed some throat problems, but mostly talking and swallowing. And that kind of phenomenon where a punishment fits the offense or a symptom fits the guilt is called the Italian principle. And so the Italian principle, best defined, would be that the symptom fits the guilt and the punishment fits the crime. So a pickpocket, if he or she developed guilt, would develop paralysis of the hands. A peeping Tom or a peeping Jane might develop visual problems if they felt guilty about looking around corners. And Anna O was hypnotized by Breuer, and she relived her experience, and the symptoms went away. And Sigmund Freud heard about this and was so impressed that he, although being a neurologist, left the field and became a psychoanalyst. He got interested in psychiatry. He was so impressed with this cure of Anna O. I want to digress a bit because the catharsis, the release of emotions by words or behavior. And I don't know, did we do the marathon yet? 4 C's of the marathon? Okay, that's coming up. Catharsis is the first C, where you release emotions with words and behavior, and the symptoms go away. So Breuer hypnotized Anna O. She relived the experience, had an emotional release, and the symptoms went away. What about catharsis? It can also be a phenomenon that gets expressed in violence and in people who are much worse off. For example, in a killing in a small town, there was which is a movie, there was a Sunday school teacher, and I'm going to show you her in the film, who was having an affair with a church fellow, and the wife found out. And the wife visited the lady who was having an affair. Let's call her Candy Morrison. And the Peggy Blankenship visited Candy and said, "Hey, you're having an affair with my husband." And Candy, as a child, hurt herself once and was taken to the emergency room of the hospital, and she wanted to cry because she had so much pain, and the mother and father kept saying, "Shh, shh, shh, don't say anything, don't embarrass us in this room." And so Candy couldn't live through the pain of that experience and carried that in the movie. And when Peggy came to visit her, she was so angry at Candy that she had an axe with her, and she swung it at Candy. It was in Peggy's house, so she'd invited her over for coffee. And she chipped Candy's body, and she started bleeding a little bit, and it hurt. And so Candy started crying, and Peggy said, "Shh, shh, shh, don't cry, the neighbors will hear us." And it reminded her of the emergency room, and Candy, all that repressed material from childhood blew up. Candy took the axe, and she cut up Peggy pretty bad and killed her with the axe. That kind of catharsis of repressed material is very dangerous. And it reminds me a little bit of this lady called Lizzie Borden, who was real and who did the same thing to her parents. There's an old refrain, Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and then when she was done, I think she gave somebody the father 41 or something. Here it is. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. So Lizzie Borden, in real life, killed her mother and father with an axe. It's a cathartic way. So this business of catharsis through violence is real. And then we have another case called O.J. Simpson. Have you ever heard of O.J. Simpson? Star football player? No? No? Oh, yeah, sure. He, in 1994, apparently stabbed to death his wife Nicole and her visiting friend Ron Goldman, but he got off. And then he got off in 1994, but then in 2007, he went into a hotel room in broad daylight with a gun to get back some stolen memorabilia which somebody had taken from him. And of course, in broad daylight with a gun, you got to get caught. So he got caught and went to jail. This is an example of somebody who got away with a major crime, and in my opinion, the guilt haunted him over and over and over again. And he reduced the guilt by getting caught and going to prison in a civil suit later on. But he did the same thing. He stabbed to death, as Lizzie axed people. He stabbed to death those folks, his former wife and her friend. Now, I think at this point, maybe we should stop talking about Freud and his theory, because it's very compelling. And it's the first real theory of personality we had. And he did some pretty good things. He put sex out into the open. And that was good because at that time things were pretty puritanical. But way beyond that, he gave us a couple of goodies that most people don't talk about, and I will talk about them tonight. He wrote about catharsis, he wrote about hypnosis, He wrote a couple of very wonderful books, Interpretation of Dreams, and as you remember, Plato talked about interpretation of dreams. And then on page 4 of your notes, notice I have something called Psychopathology of Everyday Life, where he talked about Freudian slips, so-called slips of the tongue and slips of the pen, which today would be slips of the laptop. He did take a rap on his theories of sexuality because he made some statements about infants having orgasms, and that got him into a lot of trouble. And tonight, when I present to you one of the few recordings of Freud's voice on the planet, you will hear him talk about the remorse, or apparent, maybe not remorse, but how he feels he was unjustifiably criticized for infantile sexuality. But one of the major things about Freud is that he told us about different aspects of the personality, and let's take a look at these. And what you might do is put a piece of paper there and present them row by row. Yeah, that's great. So let's look at the top row. Freud had 3 components of personality, 2 of which are highly significant for us to know. One was superego, which is the conscience. That's not as much important for us tonight. The id and the ego were the major ones. The id meaning the expression of erotic feelings or pleasure. For him, the id was sexual. The ego, that part of the personality which makes decisions, the executive part of the personality. And with the id, there was an expression that behavior should be satisfied with pleasure immediately. With the ego, it's, oh, wait a minute, delay until it's the right time. So, if you're over in, what is it, Eagle's Nest? What's that place over there? In Napa, Eagle's Nest? And you're holding hands, your best friend. And you begin necking a little bit, and say, we can't do this in public. You go back to the room, and you play. And you play. And you keep playing until you know what. Because the id says, go for it, man. Go for it, woman. This is fun. Oh, all the way. And the ego says, oh, wait. This isn't the time. But the id gets its way, and a month later, you're expecting a baby. And 9 months later, you're changing diapers. Or, a month later, you're faced with a very critical decision over a possible abortion. Seriously. So the id got its way, and you had fun. The ego says, I told you not to. I told you to wait. Or you go down the North End, and you're walking around, and there's this guy with a push cart. And he's got all these good vegetables and stuff on the push cart, and you're hungry. You're starving. And you go over, and you say, I'll take that apple. And you grab the apple, and you start eating it without paying for it. You don't have any money in your pocket. The guy says, hey, what are you doing with my apple? You took that apple without paying for it. He comes over and he breaks your arm. He snaps it in 2. He takes your arm and goes, now you got a broken arm because the id got its way. And the ego said, why don't you wait until you get back to your room? And the pleasure principle is satisfied. And now you can't take notes in my class anymore because you got a broken arm. So this conflict between immediate pleasure and delayed pleasure is so important in Freud's theory, and it goes way beyond sexuality. It has to do with eating, drinking, going to Mary Ann's. And let's see what the next one shows. Okay, we covered that. Gratification for the id is immediate, and it's good. And it's bad, because there are consequences sometimes. The next slide. Next slide. Okay. Oh, don't go back up, please. Don't go behind the wall, please. The id is unconscious. When you satisfy immediate pleasure, very often it's out of your awareness. The ego is generally conscious, but sometimes unconscious, and we talk about the ego defense methods tonight. And I notice some of you are yawning and you're tired. Would you like to take a break? No? He said no. Okay, boss man with a black hat says no break. So, wake up. Next row. Time focus, go down just a little more so we see the word focus. The id is totally in the present. I want what I want now. And the ego says, tomorrow's another day. Be careful, today's behavior may not have serious consequences tomorrow. And so, one more maybe? Okay. Short term, long term, and then the last one. Oh yeah, that's the example. The id says, let's go for the orgasm, and the baby is on its way. So you have to be careful. You have to be careful in delaying gratification. This is huge, because your freedom for the rest of your life is going to hinge on whether you can control impulses. Remember the big I, inhibition. Inhibit sometimes the impulse to have pleasure because tomorrow's another day. And so it's not just sexuality in Freud, it's this conflict between immediate pleasure and delayed gratification. That is the essence of stress. Now let's see. I think what we'll do now is have a little fun with, and just show the top row. Let's have fun with the psychopathology of everyday life. Was a huge contribution of a book that Freud wrote. And here's the first one. I had written a letter of recommendation for a colleague at Stanford, and she got promoted, and she thanked me. And then they got a grant application, because it's peer review, so your colleagues get your applications. It was about $300,000 or $400,000 for a grant at Tufts Medical when I was there. And this group got it at Stanford, and they gave it a mediocre rating, so it didn't get funded. So I'm out of money now. My lab is in trouble. And then these people wrote me the next year and wanted a letter of recommendation again, after giving me thumbs down, so to speak. And I wrote them and I said, well, you know, I did the first one and she got promoted, but why don't you get somebody else on the second one? I'm saying to myself, how am I going to treat you guys so royally when you nailed me? And on the envelope, in those days we had typewriters. You know what a typewriter is? It's like your laptop, only it's got keys and it's hard. Okay. And on the letter I typed, Satanford University. That's a lapsus scripta, a lapse in writing, which Freud would say my unconscious thought they were devils, and therefore I wrote Satanford rather than Stanford up the envelope. Isn't that neat? That's a Freudian slip. Don't show the next one. I don't see what it is. Then I got a manuscript to review, and it wasn't very good. And the name of the author was K-R-O-P-P, Krop. Guess what I typed on the envelope? Anyone want to guess? Go for it. You know. Only one now. It was a bad manuscript. So then, do you remember President Bill Clinton? And do you remember when he had a relationship with Monica? Well, I was being interviewed on his body language, and when I typed up my notes, I was talking about their meeting in the Oval Office in the White House. And guess what I called? He's laughing. Guess what I called the Oval Office? No. Oh, come on, you're laughing and you won't. Come on, tell me. You got it. Oh, you got it in your notes. Oh, okay. That's okay. There's no surprise here. They got it in their notes. That's what I get for having such neat notes. The Oral Office, in honor of Monica and Bill and their behavior. And then, did we do Saddam Hussein, the eye blinks, that rascal? I'm writing up some notes on him and where he lived in Baghdad. And I thought so badly of him that this is what came out. Bad. And then, the next one's kind of neat. A colleague of mine wrote a manuscript. I think he wrote the manuscript. Maybe I did. I don't know. Oh, I wrote the manuscript, and he treated it very badly. It was a good manuscript. And so when I typed his name on the envelope, it came out. His name was Skinner, and I thought he had misbehaved, so I wrote Sinner on the. These are all unconscious Freudian slips. And then let's see. I was with my kids in the car, and dog was raising Cain in the back seat, and they were raising Cain. And I went to say to my wife something like, well, I'm not going to take these kids to the zoo anymore. No ifs, buts, and maybes about it. Ifs, buts, and maybes came out. Ifs, mutts, and babies. The babies because they were raising Cain, and the mutt because he was all over the place in the back of the car. And then there was a policeman I saw on the corner giving a ticket, and I thought he was being a little bit unnecessarily cruel giving that ticket because the person was parked that badly. So I wrote my note in my notes. So the policeman, I wrote police mean, because I thought he was mean. And then we're almost done. Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts used to be a little bit of a womanizer. And when he was addressing the stewardship program on airplanes. Stewardship program having to do with academics and stuff. When I was typing up my notes, I put down, since he liked women, I put down stewardess program. Because he liked, I thought he was a flirt on airplanes, he might be liking stewardesses. And then, I'm going to show you an interview, one of my first interviews in 1984 that I did on television. And you will see in the interview that the sexual tension between me and the female interviewer was so great. She stumbled on her lines, and I realized I was the first gaze aversion guy. I averted my gaze. I couldn't look at it because I was so turned on by it. Is that on tape? And I had to look away. And I don't know where it came from. We never met. We never did anything. It just was a real sexual tension. And you're going to see it on videotape the last class. So I can run out of the room before you can ask me questions about it. And what did I write about the code name of the, instead of WLVI, I put WLUV, love, for the code name of the TV interview. So, let's see. I don't know where this one came from. There's one more left on that? No? Well, there's one in your notes, which I went to talk about my eye-blink interview, and I said, the dopamine hypothesis of blinking will be resented in chapter 8. I think the reason is it was in conflict with my eye-blink hedonia hypothesis. So I resented the dopamine hypothesis. Instead of saying presented, I left out the P and I said it will be resented in chapter 8. I thought it was so neat. So those are Freudian slips. Why am I telling you about this? Because if you pay attention to them in your life, you will learn about what people are really thinking and meaning. They are significant. I've just shown you. They were out of my mind. They came out of my mind as very important. So if you pay attention to Freudian slips, whether they are on the laptop, written, and they do come through on laptops, oh yes, or spoken, lapsus lingua, or lapsus scripta, that's probably a new term, lapsus typa, we'll have to come up with something like that, laptop, iPhone, something like that. They are significant, and that's a contribution of Freud. So let's see, let's summarize a little bit and say that psychoanalysis made a contribution. Interpretation of dreams, which I didn't get into. Interpretation of slips of the tongue, slips of the typewriter, and the main thing is delay gratification when necessary to reduce stress. And in this course called Psychophysiology of Stress, that's huge. Delay gratification when necessary to reduce stress. You go with impulses. Remember inhibition? I said inhibition was a tremendous contribution to our lives because we stopped instead of making a big mistake. That's the ego saying, hold on, wait a minute, don't do that. That's the ego inhibiting you rather than the id having its impulse expressed whenever it wants. That's, to me, that's a real contribution to Freud. And so, we talked about that as a contribution. Interpretation of dreams, and the therapy technique. Lie down on my couch and let your mind wander. It's like our meditation technique. When you meditate in this classroom, you let your mind wander from all over the place. Psychoanalysis does that. So just lie down on the couch and free associate. Negatives, you'll hear him call it a science. It's not a science, it's a theory and a method. He was criticized because his information is based on too few people. He just had a few subjects, few patients, and he had this theory based on too few patients. I don't think that's a fair criticism. I think if you know yourself and one other person, you can learn a lot about human nature. I think that's very unjustified criticism. Pessimistic view of man, sure, but he did that in his last year of life. Let's see if we can now go to the, this slide is good, yeah. This philosopher says, look, you've got all of human nature inside you. You want to learn about human nature? Become aware of who you are. What's distraction meditation all about? Awareness begets freedom. Awareness during meditation of letting all the thoughts come through. All the thoughts come through, uncensored. And then he was criticized, and probably justifiably, for thinking negatively about humans. Humans are animals. They go for sex all the time until World War I, and then he saw people killing each other on the battlefield, and he said, you know what? There has to be something more than eros, so I'm going to postulate thanatos, two Greek words, eros, life, thanatos, death. And he then concluded after World War I, during World War I, that humans are motivated also by a death instinct in addition to a life instinct. But that's still pretty gross. Where's the respectability and where's the dignity of human nature? Well, guess what? The year before he died, he's in England, and one of his students came, psychoanalyst, said to him, "Master, can you tell me, what is it about psychoanalysis that cures people?" Here's a guy who thinks humans are animals driven by eros and thanatos, death instinct and life instinct, all physiological. And this is what he said. That's amazing. Truly amazing. How dignified, how humanistic. At one point during the analytic process, the analyst loves the patient, and the patient knows it, and the patient is cured. And they call that Freud's humanism. Now maybe he knew that he's on his way out, and he wants to make sure he's in the good graces of St. Peter up there in heaven, right? The great tries to pass the spelling test. I guess St. Peter would give him that word, wouldn't he? As he gave the woman. Spell. Mr. Sigmund Freud, spell the word love. Now, here's a little story. If you just want to cover that up, put a blank over that. No, put a blank piece of paper over that. Cover it. Right. Now, I used to work at Tufts Medical School and just come here nights and teach at night. Most of my time was down there. Did I tell you about the email I got from the snow stress interview? Oh. Here goes. I did an interview on snow stress, which I should send to the class, on November 18th of February, thank you. And it went all over the United States. And I got some emails from different people that knew me, including former faculty members. And one former student from Dallas wrote, "Dear Professor Ketch, I had you in statistics in 1973. And I had a phobia of statistics. And you made the course so delightful that it became my favorite course. And today I am an expert financial analyst with numbers. Thank you so much." And I use that as a metaphor with my children. She's now about 60 years old. I tell them, you can not like something, be afraid of something, but the metaphor of my being overcome with joy with statistics course means that they can overcome their phobias and their fears. I was so touched by this. She says, Dr. Tetch is a name that we use around our house. And I had tears in my eyes. I'd never been congratulated like that before. But 1973, wow. And why do I bring it up? Because it was while I was at Tufts Medical School and I came here nights to teach statistics. One day I was driving away from Tufts Medical School on a Monday at 4 o'clock to make sure I got the class on time, Monday night, 6 o'clock, right? Left at 4, marked that. I started driving down Harrison Ave, and I stopped, and a very attractive lady walked over to the car. She was dressed well, very good makeup, good looking. I put the window down, she says, "Hello." I said, "Hello." She said, "You look like a nice man. Would you like to have a cup of coffee with me and spend some time with me this afternoon?" And I had this feeling of 1984 revisited, and I said, I gotta get to class on time, as I require my students. Oh, too bad, we could have some fun. We could have a nice time this afternoon. Oh, I'm sure we could. Thank you so much. Goodbye. And just as I pulled away, this young man in a car zipped in front of me, cut me off, and took an exit on the right-hand side. He was in the wrong lane. And I said, wait, I gotta tell my students tonight. Eros and Thanatos on the streets of Boston. This guy has a death instinct. He's going to get killed. She has a, you know what instinct? She wants to make some money. Eros and Thanatos on the streets of Boston. I thought that was a very interesting experience. And so, let's finish up now with Freud. And before we start in Neo-Freudians, let's present a very interesting tape. Why don't you show that? Put that on maybe line by line? No, you can keep it. On this tape, this DVD, and I hope you can get it on camera because it's really quite neat. You will hear some slips of the tongue by former President Ford's wife. I'm not going to cue you in, you're going to pick it up. And then, oh, it's already, okay, it's all right. She talks about sleaze slope, and then Rostenkowski talks about he being not a no-nonsense congressman, which means he confessed to being a nonsense congressman, because he used to sell congressional postage stamps and put the money in his pocket. He used to buy gifts for his wife, chandeliers for the dining room out of his congressional budget. Real nice guy. And then Bob Ryan, the columnist for Boston Globe, I'm hearing him talk about dim bunning. I don't think he thought that Senator Bunning was very smart. And then Barbara Hershey, oh, this is the movie, Killing in a Small Town, and watch Barbara Hershey with her catharsis. It's quite impressive. And then finally, one of the few recordings of Freud's voice, I don't know where I got it, it's like the videotape we had of that bad man from Iraq. We had him in the bunker, and I don't know how I got this, but I'm going to show it to you. So we'll set up the DVD, and you guys can take a little break, talk to yourself a little bit when I put it in. Want to put it in for me? Okay? All set. Let's go. Go to DVD. Is that okay to dim the lights? Yeah. Okay, we start. Oh, that's Gloria Steiner. I put her around once. And the feminists in the class didn't like it, so I don't want to get in trouble. So I took her off. Gloria Steiner got a 4-year swing. She's out of the picture now. And so the first person to come to Mrs. Ford, now I'll go quiet.
In town? I certainly thought so, and I think everybody else did too. He cut a very nice figure. I caught him on a ski slope, you know. He was skiing every weekend, and I took up skiing so that I could spend my weekends with him.
Of a criminal criminal investigation like this and the allegations leveled against you by your opposition, you feel it was the familiarity the voters there had with you after 18 terms in Congress that made them believe in you again?
Well, I think that the endorsement was that I'm not a no-nonsense congressman, that when I see a problem, I try to educate my constituency into understanding what the problem.
If you saw the look on Donald Fear's face during the televised Senate hearings on steroids and baseball, you know that it is 0 hour for Mr. Fear and his union. Mr. Fear, as had Marvin Miller before him, has routinely beaten back the owners and the commissioner's office for years. But this time, he has a foe he can't deal with. It is Mr. Fear's misfortune that the senior senator from Kentucky happens to be a certified baseball Hall of Famer. Jim Bunning was a take-no-prisoners pitcher, and now he is buzzing one right under Donald Fear's chin. Jim Bunning cares deeply about baseball's integrity, and he wants far tougher penalties for steroid use than Donald Fear does. And Jim Bunning will get what he wants because he is Jim Bunning, and because public sentiment regards the baseball union as the obstructionist standing in the path of truth, justice, the American way, and most of all, a baseball world where steroid use is verboten. Messing with owners was one thing. Messing with Jim Bunning in his wheelhouse is another.
I should say that Barbara Hersh's attorney in the movie is trying to make her seem insane to get her off on a insanity plea. I did it twice because I thought you might miss the first one.
When you went to the Blankenship house that morning, did you intend to kill Peggy?
No.
But you did. You did kill Peggy Blankenship with an axe. You did, didn't you? With this axe. Killed Peggy Blankenship with this axe! Didn't you?
1936, Freud celebrated his golden wedding anniversary with his wife, Martha. They were surrounded by friends and a family that now included many grandchildren. But this was one of the last celebrations Freud was to hold near his home in Vienna. In 1938, when the Nazis invaded Austria, he fled to England. In London, Freud was a celebrity. He was honored by the Royal Society. They asked him to sign the official charter book in which his name would appear with the signatures of Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. He was considered for a Nobel Prize several times, but was never chosen. The award he valued most was the Goethe Prize, given not for his scientific contribution, but for his literary achievements. Freud had become the most famous psychologist in the world, but he never achieved the full acceptance of the scientific community. These films are among the last taken of Freud. This was the occasion of his 83rd birthday. He was quite frail, exhausted from a 16-year battle with cancer. He died at his home on September 23rd, 1939. In one of the only recordings of his voice, Freud summarized his life's work.
I started as a neurologist trying to bring relief to my neurotic patients. I discovered some important new facts about the unconscious, the role of instinctual urges, and so on. All of these findings grew a new science, psychoanalysis, a part of psychology, and a new method of treatment of the neurosis. I had to pay heavily for this bit of good luck. People did not believe in my facts and thought my theories unsavory. The system was strong and unrelenting. In the end, I succeeded, but the struggle is not yet over. Sigmund Freud.
I see that twice a year and I'm still struck by it. It's so dramatic. He was talking about infantile sexuality, about unsavory theories of semen. Okay, that's not right. So, let's see. I think you got a pretty good idea. Let's go to Doc Cameron. I think you got a pretty good idea of what Sigmund Freud was all about. And I summarized the pros and the cons pretty much. And then a whole bunch of people followed him in terms of their wanting to succeed him. You could play around and see if they find another. No? Am I coming through okay? The microphone is dead. You okay? Can you hear me? I'll speak up a little louder. That's okay with you. The Neo-Freudians start out with Carl Jung. And Jung was important because he... You okay? Jung was important because he, like everyone that follows, rejected sexuality as the only important part of personality development. And he came up with an interesting concept called synchronicity. Jungian synchronicity means that some things kind of come together in a very strange and unusual way. And I gave you a couple of my stories there, here in the lecture notes. One, I'm gonna take that, keep going. Let's see if we can fix this. How's this working okay? One is the business of coincidences. One was down at the Cape when I was on vacation, and let's put Jung up there first. Put that down and then put the paper under Jung. Yep. He said, sexuality is not the only story. He talked about religion, he talked about extroversion, introversion, which we're going to revisit later on in the semester. He came up with the concept of extroversion, introversion. He also said that things are kind of weird in society because sometimes there are coincidences. And the one that I was going to tell you about is that at North Truro, where we go on vacation, there's a very isolated campus where we stayed, and I was reading a book one day at the picnic table at the cottage, and I very seldom did that, and the book was called Comeback by Dick Francis, and his books were usually about murder mysteries that took place at horse tracks. And I got a little nudgy because my family wasn't there, and so I thought, I think I'll take a ride down on Route 6, which I hardly ever have done before, ever, in like 30 years or whatever. And so I got in my car and I drove down Route 6, and on the way back, a horse jumped out in front of my car on the highway. And I had just read my first book on horses and murder mysteries. I said to the lady, does this happen very often? No, it's never happened, sir. This is the first time the horse got loose and jumped out on the highway. So what a coincidence. And then another coincidence, same picnic table. I'm reading a short story, and again, I didn't spend much time at that picnic table. This is very unusual, by Antonio Frazier, called Death of an Old Dog, a murder mystery. And now on this campus, dogs were not permitted, but a plumber had come to fix something, or a tradesman had come to fix something at one of the cottages. And as I read Death of an Old Dog, I felt something rubbing up against my leg. Guess what? It was a dog. Strange. Now again, same picnic table. Sometime later, I was given a book. When I was a senior in high school, I was given a book by Harvard as an enticement to go to Harvard, to go to college there, which I didn't do. And the book was called Ant Hill Odyssey. It was on my bookshelf for many, many years. And one summer I said, I think I'll bring this to the Cape, just out of the blue. And I brought it to the Cape, and I'm sitting at the picnic table looking at it for the first time in probably 50 years, because I graduated high school in 1950. 50 years later, I'm looking at this book for the first time, and I felt something scratching on my leg, and I went down to scratch my leg, and guess what was on my leg? What? Yeah. Ants. So these three stories tell you about the coincidentality, and there are a couple of others that I have there. The coincidences are very, very striking. Now let me tell you about one that happened here at Boston College. As you know, I get a lot of athletes, actually athletes in my class. I think in this one there are 20. And I get some baseball players. And at the last class, we fill out a questionnaire, just as you did the first class. And some of the baseball players were missing a couple of years ago. So I emailed them and I said, hey guys, come to my office tomorrow and make out the questionnaires. So they came to my office. And while we were there, I had a little fun telling them, reached over onto a shelf and I said, oh, you know, you guys are baseball players. Let me tell you a little story. And I said, back in 1950, June 20 of 1950, I was privileged to pitch a championship game at UMass in a high school tournament. And when I came off the mound, having pitched a championship game, I said, I want you guys to see this ball. It's got some nice signatures on it, including one from the owner of Myrack Chevrolet in Arlington, who was the manager. I'd like to take a look at it because it's kind of neat, but when I came off the mound, June 20, 1950, guess what? Joe, the Korean War just broke out. We heard it on the radio. Whoa! So I showed him the baseball, and that was fun. And I said, let me show you one other one, guys. This was in, that was 1950. This is 1969. I've got my 7-year-old son with me at Fenway Park, and we're in the first base stands. And there we are, watching the game. And I played a lot of baseball, so I knew when that ball went in the air, I said, Chris, it's coming here. So I got up on the seat, way up in the air, and the ball starts going over. And I said, I can't lose this. So I leaped in the air, grabbed the ball, fell on just a couple rows in front of me on the seats, on a lady, and her dress went up over her head, and I don't think she had the underwear on, and she was totally embarrassed. She said, you fresh man, you made me look, you're obscene, look what you did to me. I said, lady, I just flew out of the air. I had no choice on this. I came out of the air. And then 2 kids grabbed my arm. I had the baseball. 2 kids, one on each side, 2 boys, grabbed my arm, trying to jiggle the baseball loose so they could take it home. And I gave them an uppercut with my elbows to the jaw, and they went backwards, they over backwards. And then they come up to, hey, mister, you're good. You often catch baseball. I said, it was the first time I've ever done it, and I wasn't letting you guys take it away. Well, you did good. Nice going, man. And they walked away. And so I showed this to the baseball players, and they went home. One kid didn't show up in the class. He came the next day. And I said, oh, did they tell you about the baseballs? And he said, yeah. I said, well, let me show you. Here's one, here's the other. And he said, oh my gosh, August 7, that's my birthday. So it was a nice little Jungian with a baseball date when Seattle played Boston. Well, that's interesting. Seattle played Boston. Who was in the Super Bowl? Interesting coincidence. He said, that's my birthday. So that was a Jungian synchronicity. Anyway, so fun. Let's go to the next guy, the next Neo-Freudian. What does that mean? Modified Freudian after Jung is Alfred Adler. And put it down a row. Just put it down a row. Oh, let me just show you this slide in its entirety to let you see what the definition is of Jungian synchronicity. I think you got it in your notes. Is it in your notes? It should be typed out in your notes. Okay, take that off. And can you tell me what the next, you have an idea what the next slide is? Oh, yeah, put that on there for a minute. I want to just follow up with one more. I told my kids about my reading these books. Reading about horses, a horse appears. Reading about dog, a dog appears. Reading about ants, and they said, Dad, please don't read Jurassic Park. I thought that was cute. Okay, take that off, please. And what's the next one? Okay, let's continue with this. Alfred Adler. Yeah, he came up with the idea. He said, Freud's wrong. It's not all sex. He said, let's talk about, he used to be an ophthalmologist, but he couldn't see, remaining an eye doctor. So he changed his profession and became a psychiatrist. And he's the one who came up with the idea of an inferiority complex. Talk about an inferiority complex as something more important than sexuality. Karen Horney, the next one, please. Just bring it down. Now, notice it's pronounced Horney. She rejected sexuality and also Freud's notion that personality was all about penis envy and that men were the superior race and all that stuff, superior gender. And so she came up with an interesting concept called neurotic paradoxes, which I like. She said, you know, what really gets us in society is the tensions and stresses produced by contradictions in our society. And I call these neurotic paradoxes, she says. For example, it says, people say, you know what? Win the race, be competitive, be number one. And then society says, but if somebody hits you with something, turn the other cheek and don't hit them back and be very passive. So be aggressive in achievement, but be passive in interpersonal relationships. Harry Stack Sullivan, and this is important. This is one of the most important concepts in this class. He said Freud was wrong, it's not all sexuality. You grow up with a self-image. And that self-image can be, well, let's take an example. Johnny is at the breakfast table at home and he spills a glass of water. And his father says, oh, Johnny, not again. Uh-oh. What does that communicate? That Johnny's always spilling a glass of water and he's not very worthwhile. So Johnny grows up with a bad me self-image because his dad, maybe his mother, constantly remind him, oh yeah, what do you expect from Johnny? He's spilling a glass of water again. And what he says is, Harry Stack Sullivan says is, later on in life, you get this bad me image, and someone says, oh, hey, you got a nice tie on, Joe. That's a nice tie. And I say, oh yeah, but you know what? It looks nice, but you know, way under here, there's one little thread that's out of whack. I can't stand a compliment of a good tie, so I find something wrong with it. Or, hey, nice going, Jane. You got an A on that exam. Good going. Nah, I was lucky. I really didn't deserve it. So be careful. When you get praise, accept the compliment and then pay one back, particularly in the do-good project that's coming up. And so what Sullivan says is the bad me can haunt you. And so in the last class that we have here, I'm going to talk about polishing up the good me and deep sixing the bad me, because that's going to get in your way of being loved, expressing love, and being a good human being. The bad me is an image you want to get rid of. And he came up with the concept of significant others, which is used today for all kinds of relationships. Hartman and Schwartz, let's see. Okay. Oh, we have only 5 minutes, but let me introduce the behaviorist model. And let's set the time so we don't go over. The behaviorists, well, let's see, what's in the next slide? We have any? No, we're coming up to the behaviors, that's good. No, let's go down one row. Yeah, no more. One more. Keep going. All right, let's get rid of that slide. And then we don't have to put one up right away. all of these people rejected the pansexuality, P-A-N, pansexuality. That means across-the-board sexuality of Freud. And they all did it in different ways. Now the new kid on the block, the behaviorists, also rejected it and said, it's not all about instinct and biological urges, it's about behavior. And this is where psychology came in, because psychology is all about behavior. And to start off, we have Pavlov, and we have some of the behaviorists coming along. And the first one is classical conditioning, Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. And he talked about, we might break a few minutes early since this is a new block of material. And come on back at your usual time at 7:25 to meditate. But we might stop a little early. We could stop a little earlier if you can come back a little earlier, but let's stick to the regime. 7:25, see you, have a nice break, come on back on time. Get up there, yeah, it's working fine. So we have to switch here. So now we're entering into psychology land, and here we have a break with the Freudian notion of sexuality by behaviorists. And the first group involved in classical conditioning. And here we start out with Pavlov, a Russian, who conditioned dogs through salivary conditioning. And he struck upon it with some good luck. He brought a dog into his lab and put it up on the table. Is this okay? Yeah. And put some food powder in the dog's mouth. And the dog started salivating. And then one day, one of his assistants, Boris, come in. Food, salivation. Because if you think of, if you put food in your mouth, you're going to have an instinctual salivation response. But now, they saw that when Boris came in, dog started salivating before the food was put in his mouth. Why? Because the footsteps were the preliminary sign and signal that he was going to get the food, and that's classical conditioning. And instead of having Boris do it, they used a bell, food, salivation. Bell, food, salivation. Bell, whoop, salivation before the food, because the brain now anticipates the food. And that anticipatory response is called classical conditioning. And there you have it. That's all it is, very simple. But there are some very dramatic examples of it beyond that. What's the next thing show? Oh, Little Albert, classical case study. John Watson and his research assistant, Rosalie Rayner. And what they did was they put Little Albert on a table, and Little Albert liked furry objects until they came up behind him with a loud gong. And now, loud gong, he got afraid and he cried. Loud gong, he got afraid and he cried. So that's unconditional. That's an unconditional stimulus, and crying follows it because it's a reflex. Now they present a white furry rat to Albert, who he used to like the white furry rat, and now it was followed by a loud gong and crying. White furry rat, loud gong and crying. white furry rat, whom he used to love, now elicited crying. So that's conditioning. Just a side story, John Watson and Rosalie Rayner, his research assistant, did this experiment. It's a classic experiment. But they worked together long hours and they became friends. And then they became super friends. And John Watson's wife found out about it. So she went and visited the family of Rosalie Rayner. And while she was visiting, she snuck into the bedroom and found the letters that John Watson had written to Rosalie Rayner. And she got these letters. This is a sociology of science. She got these letters and showed her brother. And his brother made a deal with John Watson. He said, either you give me a lot of money, I'm going to show these all over the town. And Watson said, go to heck, I'm not going to give you any money. So what the brother did was bring him to the president of Johns Hopkins University. And in those days, professors could not have affairs with their graduate students. And they fired him. And he became a very successful businessman in New York, advertising, I think. So that's a little bit of sociology. But now, let's see what we can say about this story. No, don't control, please. I was in the Army as an officer, and I'd never been in the air before. And a friend of mine was a helicopter pilot. He said, hey, come on, get in the helicopter and I'll show you Fort Eustis, Virginia. So we went up in the air, and it is a pleasure to be in a helicopter. It's like you own wings. You're like an angel up there, flying around, go anywhere you want, here, there. It's so mobile and so flexible in the way it works. Now there's a phenomenon known as autogyration, where when you're in a helicopter, the pitch of the blades is such that there's wind resistance against the pitch of the blades if they're at an angle like this. And so my friend said, watch, I want to show you something. We're going to cut the motor to a minimum, and we're going to kind of float down nice and quietly, because the wind resistance underneath the blades is going to make us just go slowly. Well, we hit a vacuum pocket where there was very little wind resistance, and the helicopter started plummeting fast to crash. So he got on the motor real quick. Too late. The wheels of the helicopter hit the landing lights, and it shook us like this, and we almost crashed completely, and I almost peed my pants. I was so scared. We almost died. And I developed a phobia for flying. Until I was in Washington, D.C., and I had to give a talk in Kentucky, and I said, I can't take the train again. So I decided to fly and overcome my phobia, and I went in the air. I went to the airport, and I told the stewardess, and I had a drink of wine, which I hardly ever did. And she said, oh, come on, that's okay. So she took me by the arm, and she held my hand during takeoff. Oh, this is nice. These phobias work pretty good. And I did that a couple of times, and then there's a phenomenon known as extinction. If you repeat a response and it doesn't get punished, it doesn't get reinforced, the brain says, I'm going to habituate, and I'm not going to respond, I'm not going to waste my time on a response that doesn't do anything in your life. So I habituated, I extinguished the response, and I began to take more flights. That row shows the paradigm. So the sight of an aircraft made me phobic until I overcame it, because it was a fear of dying. In the old days, we used contact lens cleaner, and we also used a contact lens, a fluid where you can put the lens in your eye. What's that called? The cleaner and the, what's it called?
Solution.
Yeah, it's what kind of solution. I made a mistake, and I put the cleaner on the lens, which is a chemical, a strong chemical, and put it in my eye. and it burned the cornea. And I had a phobia, next slide, of putting in my contact lenses. Oh, the next one's different. Sorry, that's not on the slide. A girl in my other class was eating lobster and she almost choked on the lobster because there was a piece of claw in the meat that she didn't see. She almost died. And therefore, the next slide shows fear conditioning. Sight of a lobster made her afraid because she almost choked and died on it. So fear is often classically conditioned, and therefore it can be unlearned. What's the next one? Oh, a girl woke up with a spider on her face in her bedroom one day. Scary. And she developed a fear of spiders. I want to tell you about one that has to do with Jung. I was jogging around the neighborhood one day, several years ago, and a Lhasa Apso, it's a little fancy kind of a dog, jumped out from nowhere in the neighborhood and bit my leg. And I went home and I started bleeding pretty badly, and my son said, "You gotta go to the hospital, Dad." I said, "Okay." So I drove to Newton Wellesley Hospital because I was okay, I could drive myself. In the waiting room, a girl came up to me. "Hi, Professor. I was in your class last semester. What are you here for?" "Oh, a dog bit me on the leg." She said, "Oh my gosh. I was in your class. I was bitten in the face as a child by a dog, and you cured me of my phobia of dogs." That's a Jungian synchronicity, isn't it? I got bit, she got bit. We met at the Wellesley Hospital. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So that was a Jungian, and also talked about dog phobia. Having said that, McGuinn Kennels, this building, has dogs on the 4th floor, and it's not fair because some students don't like dogs, and I have an allergy to dogs now. But the McGuinn Kennels, the 4th floor of McGuinn, has dogs on it that shouldn't be there. But we know about that. Did I tell you about that? Yeah. The dog that gulped the banana in the classroom. Whoa. Where are we at? What's the next slide? What's the next row show? Okay, get in the face. Next slide. Go down a little. Acid in the eye. Okay, I think we're done with that. What's going to... So that's classical conditioning. What's the value of it? It tells about how fear can be learned. And if that's true, it tells about how fear can be unlearned. Keep presenting little Albert with that little white furry rat without the gong, you're going to get over it. Keep going on the aircraft holding hands with the steward, yes, you're going to be over it. So now, the next kind of conditioning. A little kitty cat is in a puzzle box, and he happens to hit a little bar, and down comes a nice piece of food, and he's hungry, he eats it. He learns to press the bar to get food. This is called instrumental conditioning. It is the basis of our life. We all use this every day of our lives. We work to get money, that's instrumental conditioning. We study to get grades, that's instrumental conditioning. This is the basis of life. Next slide. Oh, go up, back up, please. Ted Williams. Ted Williams was a left-handed hitter for the Red Sox. Did anyone ever hear of Ted Williams? Last guy in the big leagues to hit 406 in 1941. The last guy. He's a left-handed batter. He's up at the bat like this. And the catchers are always right-handed. So he takes the ball, and the catcher goes to throw it back, and it hits Ted Williams on the head. Deep pain. Thereafter, Ted Williams always did this. Took a ball, and he knew the catcher was going to throw it back, and he went like this. And he didn't get hit. So that gesture rewarded him from not getting hit. So what did Ted Williams do for several months? Every time the catcher threw the ball back? Superstitious behavior, but instrumental conditioning. Next slide. Oh, there it is. Change his head. Next slide. That's it. Okay, so, what let's forget these stories and let's go to, even look. Oh, the dad who swore off money, I learned not to swear. I used to swear a little bit when I was a dad with 5 kids because they ran me ragged. And I decided to stop using profanity around the house. And I went on a project where if I said a swear, every kid got 10 cents each time it happened. I only had 4 children then. And on Friday night, I'd pay them off so they'd keep a record on the wall. And it was so embarrassing to have them line up in outside my bedroom and say, "Okay, Dad, time to pay us for all the swears." And it was so tough for me to have them look at me and that I stopped swearing. It was a punishment, and I stopped swearing. That's instrumental conditioning. What else? Let's go to, so instrumental conditioning is huge. It's huge. It's with us every day. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry. Yeah, good enough. Yeah, go. Did anyone ever hear of Mr. Rogers? What did you hear?
Mr. Rogers?
Mr. Rogers, yeah.
He just had his TV show.
Yeah.
Wore sweaters.
Wore sweaters, he was very cute. He would say, he was a humanist. He was, "Won't you be my neighbor today? Come on in and share with me my room here." And he'd go on TV and he'd have these kids watching him on television. And he was very nice and very gentle. "Won't you be my neighbor? I like you because you're you." That's all humanist. And then, of course, there was a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers, who was a humanist. So I call them the Rogers boys. One's a psychologist and one's a TV guy who shows love for children in a very nice way. Well, that's humanism. And what's humanism all about? Let's see if we have something coming up. Take out the Rogers boys. Yeah. Let's look at the... I first should say, cover it up, please. Cover it up, please. That existentialism is different than humanism. Humanism says, Freud, you don't have to do it with Freud's sexuality, that's crazy. Humanism says, individual is worthwhile because they're human. We love each other because we're human. You don't have to be conditioning people with shocks and food. No. Humanism is the person is valuable because they're a basic human being and you have free will, you can do what you want, blah, blah, blah. And so life is good because we are dignified individuals who are worthwhile because we're alive. And the existentialists would say, the meaning of life comes when you meet a crisis. If you meet a crisis and you survive, like Nietzsche says, that which does not kill us only makes us stronger. That's existentialism. When you go to the cliff, you look over and you're going to jump and you say, nope, I don't think I'm going to jump, I think I'll stay alive. You have experienced the meaning of life by coming close to death. That's a little different than humanism, and so they're quite different. And now let's look at the differences, let's look at the similarities. They emphasize uniqueness to the individual. We'll take the sheet off. They're against dehumanization. They like values, self-determination, free will, not determinism, which Freud was all about. Individual responsibility. Life is a process of becoming. Now let's look at the differences. Let's go to one. One's American. The Rogers boys were Americans. Nietzsche and all those other guys were Europeans. Next slide. Next row. Humanism is very positive. I like you because you're you. You're valuable because you're you. You're breathing, you're good. The existentialist said, no. Only if you're in a crisis do you come to terms with who you are. It's a little bit more negative. That's what doesn't kill us, only makes us stronger. Next slide, next row. Optimistic versus pessimistic. Next row. Rational. The humanists say we're rational human beings, we're good human beings, we have halos around our head. The existentialists say, no, 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 no. You have irrational tendencies, you're negative, you go to the cliff, and then you learn about who you are when you're ready to jump off, but you don't. Next slide, next row. Innate goodness, innate frailty. Existentialists believe you're innately prone to be negative and to skate on thin ice. Next slide. Next row. Anxiety is, don't go up. Anxiety is not essential for the humanists. You're good because you're you. Mr. Rogers said, I like you because you're you. That's got nothing to do with anxiety. For the existentialists, you've got to have anxiety and a crisis to know the meaning of life. Next row. Next row. Crisis, non-essential. Okay. Now, let's go to the next model. And what does it say? Oh, okay, not yet. I'm not ready for that yet. The next one's a cognitive model. This is powerful. Do you remember in the meditation lecture, appraisal? Stress is the result of a demand that can do harm. What was the can do all about? How you appraise your life. What you see is what you get. Half glass is full or the half glass is empty. And that's what cognitive models are about. And so psychology put that on the map because they said thinking and the brain, thinking is very important. And then the term cognitive appraisal came up. I use the term appraisal. Why don't I use cognitive appraisal? Because that's a tautology. Tautology, which is in your lectures. A tautology is a redundancy. Cognitive appraisal is a redundancy because appraisal is all about cognitive. Anyway, it's very powerful, very powerful. What you see is what you get. Your ability to appraise and your ability to pay attention are huge in the success of your life and freedom of choice hereafter. Appraisal and attention, and of course the third one, awareness, which we get in our meditation. What about cognitive model? Well, there's a concept here I put in when I had my children running around the house. In the cabinet where I used to shave with the mirror, I'd have a little glass full of water when I wanted to take a drink, and the kids would always take my glass away. Hey kids, where's my glass full of water? Oh Dad, we needed it. You can go find another one. And they just laughed. So, did you ever see one of these canisters, shaving canisters with a plastic cap on the top? That plastic cap on the top of a shaving canister or whatever, anything you buy at the store. Well, I took that cap off the top and I washed it and I put it next to the shaving cream. So now you have a shaving cream canister called Edge, and you have a little cap for the canister next to it. No, that's not a cap anymore. That's my glass for drinking water. And the kids never figured it out. They come in, Dad's glass is not here, we can't take it. Dad's glass was there when it was masquerading as a shaving cup can. And that's called functional fixity. They got sucked into thinking that was a cap because it was bought as a cap. If something is fixed in a function, you can't break out and be creative. So functional fixity is a strong habit that makes you think only of one thing, one function for any object. Chewing gum. It's chewing gum, right? No, it's glue. If you're stuck for glue, take your chewing gum out. Use it to put something on the wall. So, what else? Anyway, you can think of a bunch of things that can be used differently. And I use the term Einstellung, from the German word for functional set. So an Einstellung is a mental set. That's going to be on the exam. I'll take that. Einstellung means some kind of a fixation you have, a cognitive fixation, which... so anyway, 4 eyes, DVD, story. Okay. Stress is relative, and how you see it is how you get it. When I was growing up, my brother and I shared a bed. It was not a big bed, and I complained about the stress of having to sleep in bed with my brother in a small, relatively small bed. And then I went in the army. I lived in barracks. You know what a barrack is? It's an open area where beds are all along the side and it's all open. And I said, oh man, living and sleeping in these barracks where every time a guy hiccups, you wake up. Every time a guy has a bad dream, you wake up. Oh, my bed over in Wakefield looks like a dream compared to living in barracks. And then I went on bivouac. We had to live in the field in a tent. And I said, oh man, this ground is hard under this tent. I can't get to sleep. Those barracks look so good now because of the tent and the hard ground to sleep on. This is the pits. Not quite, Joe. We had to go on sentry duty. Leave the tent, go out on the perimeter. Who goes there? No tent. You have to sleep on the ground without a tent over your head, and it began to rain one night. And I said, oh, that tent looks so good with that tent covering me from the rain. So, stress is relative. Stress is relative. I complained about having no shoes until I saw someone with no feet. Biopsychosocial model. Is that showing up for this? Okay, just hold off on that. So cognitive model is powerful. What you see is what you get. Appraisal and attention. The biopsychosocial model on page 18. Biopsychosocial. It takes in biology, psychology, and sociology, or social psychology. And we call that eclectic. And on page 18 I define that. Eclectic means you take different attributes from different models and put them together. I also use the term multidisciplinary. Biology, psychology, and sociology all contribute to the biopsychosocial model. So multidisciplinary is several disciplines. Eclectic is taking the attributes from each of them. So I want you to know that, eclectic. And what I did was to wrap up. I thought, wouldn't it be neat if we took a concept and looked at it from all of the different models that you had tonight? Because you had a trip through several theoretical models. By the way, read them over, study them, because you might see these on the graduate record exam. These are all very popular models in psychology. Excuse me. So I thought it would be neat if we took one phenomenon and looked at it from the point of view of each of these models. And then you'd see the differences right down the line. So put that up and look only at the first row. Oh, up. Let's see. Depression and theoretical model. Okay, down one. Thank you. Let's take depression. The blues. Because you know, I think this is the only mental disorder that's going to be significant, most significant in your lives. Depression, that's the one. Loss of control, being jerked around, being helpless, feeling blue. And so let's look at it. Well, Freud would say depression is the loss of some kind of cathexis. What's cathexis? An emotional or sexual investment in something. So if you're not invested emotionally in a human being or a passion, then you have probably gone into a slight depression because you don't have any passion in life, no fun, nothing to invest in. Whether it's sexual or non-sexual, just emotional, Freud would say it's loss of some kind of cathexis, emotional investment. Then, next one, behaviorists would say depression is the lack of reward or positive reinforcement. If and this is all in your notes, it's all on page 18. If you have never been praised for 2 weeks, no one ever said nice going, no one ever smiled at you as a social reward, you're going to get depressed, say the behaviorists. A lack of any reward or social positive reinforcement in your life. The cognitive model, you know how that's going to go. A little down, a little more maybe. Okay. Here, you're looking at the world through a clouded lens. The half glass is always half empty. Everything is negative. You're counting flea legs. You're looking at stuff that's not important and letting it bother you. Next slide. The humanist says, if you're not aware of your value, excuse me, as a human being, you're going to get depressed because you are a good human being. And the existentialist would say, you don't have any crisis, so you're not finding any meaning in life. You're going to have something negative to goad you into finding the real meaning in life. That's depression. And the neuroscientist would say, which I didn't cover much because I'm going to talk about the brain in great detail, neuroscience model is neurons. It would say depression is a function of too little serotonin, too little norepinephrine, and therefore your brain is not putting out enough neurotransmitters to make you feel good about yourself. And dopamine. And finally, the biopsychosocial model is a combination of all the criteria above. So, let me say that I think we're okay on most of this stuff. What I'll do next time is bring in, well, let's not go there because it's 2 weeks from now. We're a little ahead of schedule, so let's see if there's anything else you want to do. I'll just summarize some of the places we've been by saying that models are important because they help describe and explain what's going on in our lives. And the 4 goals of science, as you know, are description, explanation, prediction, and control. So models, as fancy as they are, as complicated as they are, even Freud's model is complicated. They give us a chance to find out about cause and effect relationships. They give us a chance to try to understand the phenomena. Because if we have just a bunch of 2,000 loose facts in our head, that's confusing. If we have just a bunch of facts, A, B, C, D, E, how do you make any sense out of that? Well, theoretical models pull it together. What did Freud pull together? Sexuality, immediate pleasurable satisfaction. He brought together people who were neurotic. As he said, he put them on the couch, he brought them on the couch and said, you know, you have problems, you're unconscious. He brought together the unconscious, the conscious, and therefore models help clarify and make sense out of a whole bunch of facts which wouldn't make sense if they were just isolated. Depression is a good example. We come to terms with depression by trying to understand its different aspects because each model brings us a complexity of facts that's important. Any questions? Did you want to go with any questions? I have a question. How did the meditation go? Did you want to chip in with anything on meditation? Anyone have any unusual experience tonight in the meditation? Anyone have how about saliva buildup? Oh, did the sheet go around? Where's this meditation sheet?
It's here.
Where is it? Oh, did it go around? Oh, great. Anyone have a saliva buildup? I don't want to ask whether the room was quiet because it might shock me. Well, here's what I suggest. do 1 or 2 meditations between now and when you come back from break. Just keep in the mode, because if you do, then when you come back from break and we meditate 2 weeks from tonight, you'll go deeper. So try to do 1 or 2, well, more if you can, but 1 or 2 between now and when you come back from break. And also, it wouldn't hurt to study some of your notes because the midterm's going to come up right after that. Okay, good night, have a good break, stay safe, and hold well.